So think about this for a second. What if the entire universe was actively bending over backwards to help you achieve your wildest dreams right now?
But you were just too terrified to actually take that first step.
Exactly. I mean, that is the deeply uncomfortable and honestly completely paralyzing question sitting at the absolute center of today's deep dive. We're looking at a pretty unique piece of source material today.
Yeah, it's not just a standard book review.
Right. It's a concise bilingual book review. It's actually presented simultaneously in both English and Hindi, and it covers Paulo Coelho's massively famous allegorical novel, The Alchemist.
But, we aren't here just to recount some basic plot summary of a famous book.
No, not at all. Our mission is to really mine the core philosophical arguments embedded in this specific review. We want to examine why this story is heavily recommended for anyone feeling completely stuck in life.
And ultimately, we need to understand the bizarre paradox of how this book's most glaring literary weaknesses are somehow also its greatest strength, which is a really fascinating paradox to untangle.
It really is.
Because the review itself is structurally quite elegant. It functions on three distinct levels. First, it gives us the core narrative drive of Santiago's journey.
Right.
Then it gives us the how. It deconstructs the mechanics of Coelho's writing and the intense duality of its critical reception.
Uh-huh.
And crucially, it gives us the who. It identifies the exact psychological state a reader actually needs to be in for this message to truly resonate.
Okay, let's unpack this. Think of this deep dive as a compass. Like, you might be standing at a blank crossroads right now. You might be feeling the massive weight of a career change or a big relationship decision, or just feeling that slow, creeping stagnation of a routine that no longer serves you.
Yeah, that terrible feeling of being stuck.
Exactly. So we're going to use the insights from this bilingual review to help you figure out which direction to walk. And to do that, well, we have to start with that terrifying opening question about the universe waiting on you to move.
Right, and what's fascinating here is the tension established in the opening lines of our source material.
Yeah.
It's incredibly potent. Well, the review frames the central theme as a juxtaposition of two opposing forces. On one side, you have this idea of the whole universe conspiring to help you, which implies a cosmic force of unimaginable, infinite magnitude actively organizing events for your success.
Yeah, but on the other side.
On the other side sits terrestrial human paralysis. I mean, the sheer physical fear of taking a single step into the unknown. The argument is that infinite cosmic support is completely neutralized if you refuse to break your own inertia.
Let me push back on that framing just a bit, because the idea of the universe conspiring to help you can sound incredibly abstract.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, almost like magical thinking. If someone is stuck in a dead-end job, the universe isn't exactly sending them literal letters of recommendation. So how does the review ground this grand cosmic idea in the actual plot of the story?
It grounds it by making the stakes highly physical. The review provides a summary of the protagonist's journey as the proving ground for this whole philosophy.
Okay, so Santiago.
Right, we follow a young Spanish shepherd named Santiago. He keeps having this recurring dream about a treasure hidden near the Egyptian pyramids. And to chase that dream, he makes a radical, irreversible choice.
He abandons his flock.
Exactly. He abandons his flock of sheep. That physical act of leaving the flock is the main catalyst.
Right, and the review notes that this journey takes him across entire continents.
Yeah, exposing him to profound love, devastating loss, and intense hardship. But the ultimate realization is that the real treasure he discovers is far deeper than literal gold.
Okay, so the review explicitly lists love, loss, and hardship as the components of the journey. But there is a massive psychological gap between having a recurring dream and actually abandoning your entire livelihood.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, in the story, Santiago literally leaves his sheep behind to go to Egypt. But if we translate this into the modern everyday world, the flock takes on a much heavier meaning, doesn't it?
Yeah, how do you mean, what does the flock look like for the average person reading this review?
Well, think of your metaphorical flock as psychological gravity.
Okay, I like that.
It isn't necessarily that your current job or your daily routine or your relationships are so deeply fulfilling that you can't bear to part with them. It's that the sheer gravitational pull of the known is always stronger than the pull of the unknown.
Yeah, comfort is a really strong force.
Right. For you listening right now, your flock might be a steady paycheck that barely covers the bills but, keeps you from starving. It might be familiar habits that numb your mind but require zero cognitive effort to maintain.
So the flock isn't keeping you there because it's a great field to graze in.
Exactly. It's keeping you there because leaving requires a massive expenditure of energy and risk.
That mechanism of psychological gravity perfectly explains the core argument of the source material. The review suggests that the actual physical journey across continents is not the primary obstacle.
Wait, really? But dealing with thieves in the desert, navigating unfamiliar cultures, that sounds incredibly hard.
It is, but those are dynamic challenges. When you're faced with a dynamic challenge, you can react, you can adapt, and you can move.
Ah, I see.
The fear of leaving the flock, however, is a static challenge. It is the paralyzing force of the status quo. The review implies that the universe cannot begin to conspire on your behalf until you overcome the static inertia of comfort. You basically have to be the one to jump first.
Which is a terrifying prospect because nobody wants to jump without a parachute.
Right, exactly.
But once Santiago does jump, once he breaks that gravitational pull of the flock, the review makes a very sudden shift. It moves away from the grand sweeping scale of this epic adventure.
And it starts analyzing how this massive journey is actually written.
Right. The transition from an epic, life-altering plot to the surprisingly simple, almost bare-bones execution of the book is really striking.
This is where we get into the what it does well versus the what could be better sections of the review.
Yeah, let's get into that.
The source material highlights a concept it calls simplicity is strength. It notes that Coelho writes with an almost childlike clarity.
Childlike clarity.
Yes, and the result of this stylistic choice is that massive, heavy philosophical ideas like existential purpose, the universe conspiring, interpreting omens, they all feel totally accessible to a layperson.
It makes it digestible.
Exactly. And the pacing is designed entirely around this simplicity. Short chapters, absolutely no filler, and it's structure so lean that the review claims you can finish the entire book in just 2 sittings.
But then the source material immediately undercuts that praise in its critique section, right?
It does. The review warns that this exact same simplicity can be alienating. It points out that readers might find the book too simplistic, or even preachy.
Yeah, it explicitly cautions that if you are a reader who prefers complex characters and layered plots, this book might feel incredibly thin.
And the spiritual messaging can come across as heavy-handed. It presents a very clear dichotomy. The praises and the criticisms are identical traits, just viewed through different analytical lenses.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if we look at the traditional metrics of literary criticism, the flaws listed in this review are usually a death knell.
Oh, for sure.
If a critic tells me a novel has a thin plot, lacks complex characters, and suffers from heavy-handed, preachy spiritual messaging, I'm absolutely putting that book back on the shelf.
Most people would.
So why does this source argue that this specific childlike clarity somehow allows the book to bypass those traditional literary rules and still be overwhelmingly recommended? Like, how does terrible traditional writing translate into brilliant philosophical delivery?
Well, it comes down to the fundamental difference between a modern novel and a fable. The review captures this paradox beautifully.
A fable.
Yes, the lack of complexity is not a flaw here. It is an absolute mechanical necessity for the story to function. Consider the protagonist.
Okay.
If Santiago had a deeply complex, layered backstory, like if he struggled with childhood trauma or had a convoluted subplot involving a gambling debt.
Or highly specific psychological quirks.
Exactly. If he had all that, he would cease to be a universal archetype. He would just be a very specific, idiosyncratic guy named Santiago. By keeping the character thin, Coelho deliberately leaves the protagonist as an empty vessel.
Oh, wow. So the lack of character development is basically an invitation for the reader to project their own life into the empty space.
You got it.
If Santiago is too specific, I'm reading a story about him. But if he's an archetype, I'm suddenly reading a story about me.
Precisely. Fables require empty vessels to hold the reader's projection. The heavy-handedness the review mentions is only a fatal flaw if you were reading the text strictly as a work of intricate modern fiction.
Right.
But if you are consuming it as a philosophical delivery system, then the simplicity is the engine of its success. The core message of the book isn't fighting for your attention against a complicated murder mystery or a sprawling cast of dozens of side characters or dense world building.
The message is the entire point.
Exactly.
That completely explains the two-sitting pacing the review praises so highly.
Yeah, because you aren't getting bogged down.
Yeah. If you are constantly stopping to figure out complex family trees or trying to untangle a web of subtle political subplots, you lose the philosophical momentum.
Yes, the momentum is key.
This childlike clarity is what allows the core message to bypass your critical, cynical adult brain. The part of you that wants to analyze sentence structure.
Yeah, and hit you straight in the chest with its actual meaning.
And that ability to bypass complex structures doesn't just apply to literary tropes, does it?
No, it doesn't. It also applies to linguistic and cultural borders.
Hmm.
The simplicity that allows a reader to project their own life onto Santiago is the exact same mechanism that allows the story to translate seamlessly across the globe.
Which brings us to the crucial structural element of our source material today, the bilingual nature of the review itself.
Right.
This is perhaps the most compelling part of the entire deep dive. The review explicitly lists a universal message as one of the book's greatest strengths.
And that centers around a concept it calls the personal legend.
Yes, the personal legend. It defines a personal legend as a person's true life purpose, their ultimate calling. And the review makes the incredibly bold claim that this specific concept resonates across all cultures, all ages, and all backgrounds.
And, many reviews claim a book has universal appeal, but our source material actively attempts to prove it through its format.
Because of the two languages.
Exactly. By presenting the analysis in both English and Hindi, the reviewer provides structural, tangible proof of the story's borderless nature.
Well, if we look closely at the Hindi section of the review, under the book's strengths, there is a specific phrase that really caught my eye.
What was it?
It says, Sawal Basha Gahari Bat. Now, for those of us who don't speak Hindi, how does this phrase expand on the English critique of simplicity as strength?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Saral Basha, Gaharibat, translates directly to simple language, deep meaning.
Simple language, deep meaning.
Yeah. And while it captures the same basic sentiment as the English praise for clarity, it frames it with a distinct cultural nuance. Well, in many intellectual traditions, both Western and Eastern, there is a tendency to conflate complex academic vocabulary with profound thought.
Oh, absolutely. Like, if it's hard to read, it must be genius.
Right, we assume that if an idea is difficult to understand, it must be important. This Hindi phrase actively dismantles that assumption.
I love that.
It emphasizes that the ultimate depth of a philosophical conversation is completely independent of the complexity of the vocabulary used to deliver it.
Simple language, deep meaning. That really strips away so much intellectual pretense. I mean, you don't need a PhD in existential philosophy to grapple with the terror of a wasted life.
You really don't.
And you don't need to navigate dense academic jargon to understand the concept of a personal legend.
The review actually further notes in the Hindi text that the idea of finding your life's true purpose.
Apni zindagi ka asli maqsad dunna.
Yes, exactly. It notes that this is a fundamental human condition. It touches every human being, regardless of whether they live in a hyper-individualistic Western society or a more collectivist Eastern culture.
That is the ultimate democratizing force of the fable structure we talked about earlier.
Right, the universal appeal.
Because the fear of breaking the psychological gravity of the flock, the quiet, persistent nagging of a recurring dream, the search for an underlying life purpose, none of these are localized problems.
No, they are inherently human.
You don't need highly specific cultural idioms to understand them. By keeping the language and the characters remarkably simple, the text ensures that this Gahari Bhat, this deep meaning, can survive the translation process entirely intact.
Which is exactly why the source material is so incredibly specific about who should read this book. The reviewer isn't recommending it to literary critics looking for avant-garde prose.
Right. Under the best for section, the text explicitly targets readers who are caught in a state of transition or stagnation.
The review lists very specific triggers, like a career change, a massive life decision, or simply feeling completely and utterly stuck.
So I'm going to turn that directly toward you, the listener.
Let's do it.
Are you standing at that blank crossroads right now? Is your personal legend, your underlying purpose, getting completely lost in the white noise of your everyday routine?
Are you stuck in the flock?
Yeah. Are you actively ignoring a recurring dream just because the gravitational pull of your current flock seems too daunting to break?
The reviewer understands the psychology of that exact vulnerable state. When a person is frozen by the terror of making a wrong choice, the last thing they need is a dense, 800-page academic treatise on the nature of free will.
Oh, definitely not.
They need a clear, direct, almost childlike narrative that cuts right through their paralyzing anxiety and speaks directly to the core of their hesitation. They need an empty vessel to project their own fears into.
And that leads us to the final verdict provided by our source material. Bringing this deep dive to a close, we move from the grand, universal, cross-cultural application of the personal legend back down to the very practical, highly actionable recommendation the review leaves us with.
The reviewer ultimately awards the book 4.5 stars out of 5.
Which is huge.
It is. And to justify that high rating, despite the acknowledged literary flaws, the review provides a brilliant summary statement, calling The Alchemist a small book that punches far above its weight.
That single sentence perfectly encapsulates our entire discussion about the inverse relationship between structural simplicity and philosophical depth.
It really does.
But, I mean, the absolute best part of this verdict isn't the star rating, it's the parting advice.
Yes, the instructions for reading.
The reviewer issues a very specific instruction. Read it once for the story. Read it again for the message. It operates almost like a guarantee.
A return on investment.
Exactly. The source material is promising that your time investment, which is minimal, just those 2 short sittings, is going to yield a disproportionately high return in terms of actual applicable life wisdom.
That dual reading instruction is vital to unlocking the book's utility. The first time through, you are operating on the literal level.
Right, just following the plot.
Yeah. You are following Santiago, experiencing the chronological plot, the Spanish shepherds, the Egyptian pyramids, the physical desert crossing. You're basically just watching a movie play out in your mind.
But the second time through, you are actively engaging with the Gahari bat, the deep meaning. You are reading the subtext. You are no longer looking at Santiago's journey across the desert. You are looking at your own journey across your own life.
You're filling that empty vessel.
Yeah. You are analyzing the mechanics of your own fears, the weight of your own flock, and the validity of your own recurring dreams.
Because the book itself is merely a catalyst. The actual transformative work doesn't happen on the page. It happens entirely in the mind of the reader, inspired by the simple language.
So what does this all mean? Ultimately, the real takeaway from this source material isn't just a binary decision about whether or not you should go buy a copy of The Alchemist.
No, it's way bigger than that.
The deeper insight here is about evaluating our own internal landscape. It's about recognizing that the feeling of being stuck isn't a permanent terminal condition. It is simply a symptom of ignoring our personal legend.
It's a harsh but necessary reminder.
It is. A reminder that the universe might actually be waiting to conspire in our favor, but it demands that we pay the admission fee of taking a terrifying first step.
And it serves as a powerful reminder that simplicity is not a synonym for stupidity. Sometimes the clearest, least complicated, most childlike truth is the exact instrument required to shatter the complex rationalizations we build to keep ourselves safely inside the flock.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds directly on the core premise of our source material, but turns the lens entirely back on you.
The review leaves us with the explicit advice to read this small book twice. Once for the literal narrative story and once for the deeper philosophical message.
Right.
But what if we applied that exact same 2-step reading process to our own lives?
Oh, wow.
If you look at your life right now, in this exact moment, you might only be seeing the story. The exhausting daily routine, the thin plot of your current job, the physical hardships, the mundane reality of grazing with your familiar flock.
Just the literal level.
Exactly. But if you were to read your life a second time, looking strictly for the subtext, looking for the omens and the message, what is the universe actually trying to help you achieve? Are you stuck at the crossroads right now simply because you are only reading your own story once?